Welcome, friend, wherever you are right now, whether you're nestled in the gentle hum of a busy city or wrapped in the quiet embrace of countryside stillness. I want you to think of this moment as your own small corner of peace. Picture it as a sanctuary that exists just for you, suspended somewhere between the rush of today and the whispered secrets of yesterday. Take a breath with me. Feel the weight of your body settling into whatever surface supports you right now. Maybe it's the familiar give of your mattress, or perhaps the worn softness of a favorite chair. Let your shoulders drop just a little. There's nowhere else you need to be. Tonight, we're going to step gently backward through time together. Not to judge what we find there, not to shake our heads at the strange ways of the past, but simply to listen, to let the stories of long ago lives wash over us like a slow, steady rainfall on a summer evening. You know, there's something almost magical about this moment we're sharing. As you listen to these words, the clock on your wall might be showing a completely different time than mine was when I spoke them. Perhaps you're preparing for sleep, while someone on the other side of our spinning planet is just beginning their day. Yet here we are, connected across space and time, breathing together in this pocket of quietude. If you'd like, you could share your time zone in the comments below. There's something wonderfully grounding about knowing that when you're drifting toward dreams, another soul halfway around the earth might be watching their first cup of coffee steam in the morning light. But right now, in this moment, we're both here, both present, both ready to let the day's worries slip away like autumn leaves on a gentle stream. I can almost hear the soft sounds of your evening settling around you. Maybe there's the distant murmur of traffic, growing fainter as the night deepens. Perhaps the comforting tick of a clock somewhere in your home, or the whisper of wind through tree branches outside your window. These sounds, your sounds, they're part of our story too. Tonight's journey will take us to a place where candlelight flickered against stone walls, where the scratch of quill on parchment was the only internet anyone knew. We'll walk through halls where the air was thick with mysteries we now understand, where well-meaning people made choices that seem impossible to us now, all while believing completely in their wisdom. But don't worry. This isn't a story designed to startle or disturb. Think of it, instead, as a lullaby woven from the threads of history, a gentle exploration that will let your mind wander and drift while your body grows heavy with the promise of rest. So settle in a little deeper. Let your eyes grow soft and unfocused if they aren't already closed. We're about to begin a journey together, you and I, into a world both strange and strangely familiar, where the universal human experiences of hope, fear, and the desperate desire to heal played out in ways that might surprise you. Welcome to our quiet corner of history. Welcome to this peaceful night. Tonight, our story isn't about the clash of mighty armies or the rise and fall of great kings. Those tales, dramatic as they are, belong to the daylight hours when minds are sharp and ready for excitement. No. The story we'll explore together is more intimate, more quietly profound. It's about something that touches every human life, in every age, in every corner of the world. It's about the body you're resting in right now, about the universal fear that has followed humanity since we first became aware of our own mortality, the fear of illness, of pain, of the mysterious ways our bodies can betray us. And it's about that equally universal longing, that deep, almost desperate hope for healing, for someone who might know how to make the hurt stop. Picture, if you will, a world where the sound of approaching footsteps could fill a sick person with dread rather than relief, where the sight of a learned man with his bag of tools and bottles might make a family weep not with gratitude, but with terror. It seems impossible, doesn't it? After all, we've been conditioned to see medical knowledge as salvation, doctors as heroes in the fight against suffering. But here's where our story takes its first gentle turn into the realm of the extraordinary. We're going to explore a truth so paradoxical, so astonishing, that it almost defies belief. For a very long stretch of human history, centuries upon centuries, many people were statistically safer if they received no medical care at all. Let that thought settle for a moment, like dust motes finding their place in a shaft of evening sunlight. This is the story of why medieval medicine, practiced by learned, well-intentioned, highly educated men, was often more dangerous than the very diseases it claimed to cure. It's the tale of how the desperate human desire to help, to heal, to fix what was broken, became twisted into something that caused more harm than the patient's original suffering. Think of it as a kind of tragic irony that played out in countless homes, in monastery infirmaries, in the chambers of both peasants and kings. The very act of seeking help, the most natural, hopeful thing a suffering person could do, often sealed their fate more surely than simply staying in bed and hoping for the best. We'll walk together through the shadowy halls of medieval hospitals, where the air was thick with good intentions and terrible consequences. We'll meet physicians who studied for decades, memorized vast texts, commanded enormous respect, and yet unknowingly became angels of death dressed in robes of learning. But don't let this disturb your peace. These are old sorrows now, ancient mistakes that helped pave the road to the medical miracles you know today. Every tragedy we'll encounter became a lesson, every failure a stepping stone toward the healing arts that now exist to protect you. So breathe easy. Let these stories become like clouds drifting across a twilight sky, fascinating to observe from your safe, warm place, but powerless to reach you now. The past has already done its learning. Tonight, it's simply here to sing you gently towards sleep. In just a few moments, we'll begin to wander together through the dim, torchlit corridors of medieval monastery infirmaries. You'll hear the soft shuffle of sandaled feet on cold stone floors, the whisper of wool robes brushing against rough-hewn walls. We'll pause at doorways where flickering candles cast dancing shadows, and peer into chambers where the sick lay waiting, hoping, trusting in the wisdom of their healers. We'll sit quietly in the corners of scholarly rooms where learned men bent over ancient texts, their fingers tracing words written in Latin by physicians who had been dust for 1,000 years. You'll almost be able to hear the scratch of their quills as they copied down theories about the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Those mysterious fluids they believed governed every aspect of human health and temperament. Picture yourself as an invisible observer, watching these robed figures as they mixed their potions and prepared their instruments. These weren't charlatans or cruel men seeking to cause harm. They were the most educated people of their time, respected scholars who had devoted their lives to the art of healing. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence that comes from years of study, their movements careful and deliberate as they went about their work. Yet, in the most tragic irony imaginable, these very men, with all their learning, all their sincere desire to help, would unknowingly become harbingers of suffering rather than relief. We'll meet physicians whose arrival at a sickbed often marked the beginning of the patient's true ordeal, though neither doctor nor family would ever realize it. But please, don't let this trouble your rest. What we're about to explore together isn't a tale of horror or deliberate cruelty. Think of it instead as the most historically accurate bedtime story you've ever heard, one that happens to be perfectly designed to be boring enough to lull you into peaceful sleep. Every detail we encounter, no matter how startling it might seem in the bright light of day, will be delivered to you in the same gentle, even tone you're hearing now. There will be no sudden dramatic turns, no jarring revelations to jolt you awake. Instead, these medieval scenes will unfold like a slow, steady river, carrying you along at the pace of a leisurely boat ride on a summer afternoon. Let these stories become like soft, gray clouds drifting across your mind's sky. Allow them to gather and disperse, to form interesting shapes for a moment before dissolving back into the peaceful emptiness that leads to deep, restorative sleep. Each tale we share will be like another gentle wave lapping against the shore of consciousness, gradually wearing away the sharp edges of the day's concerns. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Feel your breathing naturally slow and deepen. We're about to step through the doorway of time together, into a world both strange and strangely soothing, where even the most extraordinary human follies become just another part of history's long, drowsy murmur. Our journey into the sleepy mysteries of medieval medicine begins now. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Error Inside the Medieval Doctor's Mind. Close your eyes and imagine yourself stepping into a candlelit chamber in the year 1250. The air is thick with the scent of old parchment and melting wax. You can hear the soft scratch of a quill pen moving slowly across rough paper, punctuated by the gentle whisper of pages turning in heavy, leather-bound books. Somewhere in the distance, a monastery clock marks the passing hours with its steady, hypnotic rhythm. You are a young medical student, perhaps no older than 20, sitting on a hard wooden bench in a stone hall where the greatest minds of your time gather to unlock the secrets of human health. But you won't be learning about bacteria or viruses. Those concepts won't exist for another 600 years. Instead, you're about to discover something far more poetic, far more beautifully wrong: how to read the human body as if it were a living map of the entire universe. Listen as your master begins to speak, his voice echoing softly off the vaulted ceiling. He tells you that within every person flows a perfect microcosm of creation itself, 4 sacred fluids that mirror the 4 elements, the 4 seasons, the 4 winds that blow across the earth. These are the humors, and understanding their delicate dance is the key to all healing. First, there is blood, warm, life-giving blood that pulses through your veins even now as you listen to these words. In the medieval mind, blood was hot and moist, carrying within it the essence of spring itself. Picture the first warm day after a long winter, when the earth grows soft with melting snow and new grass pushes through the soil. That is blood's nature, expansive, growing, full of vital heat and nourishing moisture. Too much blood, and a person becomes flushed, energetic to the point of mania, perhaps even violent. Too little, and they grow pale, weak, listless as winter earth. Then there is phlegm, that cool, white fluid that flows from your head when you're ill. But to medieval physicians, phlegm represented far more than just the stuff of head colds. It was cold and moist, the humor of winter, of quiet contemplation, of the deep sleep that comes on long, dark nights. Imagine the peaceful hush of falling snow, the way it muffles all sound and blankets the world in pristine white. That is phlegm's domain. Too much, and a person becomes sluggish, dull-minded, prone to sleeping too much and moving too little. The perfect amount brings calm wisdom and thoughtful reflection. Next comes yellow bile, also called choler, the fierce, hot humor that burns dry like summer sun on parched earth. This golden fluid was thought to surge from the liver during times of intense emotion or activity. Picture the height of July, when the air shimmers with heat and every blade of grass crisps brown under the relentless sun. Yellow bile brings courage, ambition, quick thinking, and decisive action. But when it overflows its proper boundaries, it transforms a person into a creature of rage, consumed by anger as devastating as a summer wildfire. Finally, there is black bile, the most mysterious humor of all cold and dry, like autumn's withering embrace. Medieval doctors believed this dark fluid, produced by the spleen, governed the melancholy aspects of human nature. Think of October twilight, when the last leaves spiral down from bare branches and the earth begins its long retreat into winter's embrace. Black bile brings depth of thought, artistic sensitivity, the kind of beautiful sadness that poets prize. But in excess, it plunges a person into the darkest depression, a winter of the soul that may never see spring again. Now, imagine trying to understand every illness, every change in mood or energy through this elegant lens. A fever isn't your immune system fighting an infection. It's simply too much hot. Moist blood overwhelming your natural balance. A person who can't stop weeping isn't processing grief or trauma. They're drowning in an excess of cold, moist phlegm. Someone's explosive anger isn't a response to circumstances. It's yellow bile burning too hot and bright within them. It's remarkably like a complex recipe, isn't it? Imagine your body as an intricate dish that requires perfect proportions to turn out right. Illness is simply a matter of having too much salt or not enough sweetness. The cure seems obvious, just add what's missing or remove what's in excess. If someone has too much hot, dry yellow bile making them angry and feverish, cool them down with cold, moist treatments. If they're sluggish from too much cold, wet phlegm, warm and dry them out. This wasn't just medical theory. It was a complete philosophy of existence. The four humors explain not only why people got sick, but why they had different personalities, why they preferred certain foods, why they thrived in some seasons and struggled in others. It connected every individual to the vast patterns of the cosmos, making each person a small but perfect reflection of the universe's grand design. You can almost hear the satisfaction in your medieval professor's voice as he explains this beautiful system. Everything fits together so perfectly, so logically. There are no mysterious diseases with unknown causes. No random suffering that defies explanation. Every symptom points clearly to which humor has fallen out of balance, and every treatment follows naturally from that diagnosis. The tragedy, of course, is that it was entirely, completely catastrophically wrong. But sitting in that candlelit hall, surrounded by the gentle sounds of learning, it must have felt like the most elegant truth ever discovered, a key that unlocked every mystery of human health and happiness. And tomorrow, you would begin learning how to use that beautiful, terrible key to help your fellow human beings in ways that would often do far more harm than good. Now, let me paint for you a portrait of the man who would soon become the central figure in our gentle tale of good intentions gone astray. Picture him not as some wild-eyed charlatan mixing potions in a shadowy hovel, but as one of the most respected, most educated, most thoroughly civilized men of his entire world. See him first in the early morning light, as he prepares for his daily rounds. The sound of church bells drifts through his chamber window, calling the faithful to morning prayers, while he performs his own ritual of preparation. This is a man who commands respect wherever he walks, whose very presence brings comfort to the worried families who seek his help. His most distinctive feature, the thing you would notice first if you encountered him on a medieval street, is his magnificent robe. This isn't merely clothing. It's a statement written in wool and silk. The garment flows around him like a dark river, its hem sweeping the ground with each measured step. The length is no accident, no mere fashion choice. In the world of medieval learning, the longer the robe, the greater the wisdom it represents. A young student might wear his gown to his ankles, but a master physician's robe pools around his feet like liquid knowledge itself. Watch as he adjusts the hood that marks his academic rank, the deep folds catching shadows that speak of years spent in study. The fabric is fine wool so tightly woven, it feels almost like silk beneath the fingers, dyed deep black or rich brown with expensive pigments. But it's what he carries that truly sets him apart from any healer you might recognize today. Imagine him gathering his tools for a house call and forget everything you know about medical equipment. There is no stethoscope to drape around his neck, no blood pressure cuff tucked into his bag, no thermometer to slip beneath a patient's tongue. Instead, he carefully folds an intricate astrological chart, a masterpiece of geometric precision covered in symbols that connect the movements of planets to the mysteries of human health. Mars governs the blood, Venus the kidneys, Mercury the lungs. To lose this chart would be like a modern surgeon losing his hands. Next, he wraps a delicate glass vessel in soft cloth, a uroscopy bottle, designed to hold and display urine samples with the clarity of a jeweler's loupe. The medieval physician could tell you a patient's entire medical history just by observing the color, clarity, and sediment of their water. It was an art form as sophisticated as wine tasting, and twice as consequential. But perhaps most impressive of all are his books, those heavy, leather-bound treasures that represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries. These aren't quick reference guides or easily portable manuals. Each volume is a monument to learning, thick as a man's forearm and bound in leather soft as butter. The text inside is written entirely in Latin, not the simple Latin of everyday church services, but the elevated scholarly Latin that only the most educated minds can fully comprehend. These books contain the complete works of Galen, the ancient Roman physician whose theories about the four humors formed the foundation of all medical knowledge. They hold the wisdom of Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, whose observations from 1,000 years before still guided every diagnosis. Our physician has memorized vast portions of these texts. He can quote Galen's observations about the relationship between planetary movements and bodily functions as easily as you might recite a favorite song. And this is where we begin to understand the quiet tragedy that will unfold in our story. The confidence that radiates from this learned man, the assurance that makes families trust him with their most precious possessions. Their loved ones' lives doesn't come from having successfully treated hundreds of patients. It doesn't stem from careful observation of which treatments actually work and which ones fail. No. His confidence comes from something far more seductive, the absolute certainty that the answers to every medical question have already been discovered, already been written down, already been proven by the greatest minds in history. Why would he need to experiment when Galen had already mapped out the workings of the human body? Why would he need to question established treatments when Hippocrates had already identified the principles of healing? In his mind, medicine isn't a process of discovery, it's a process of faithful application. He sees himself not as an explorer venturing into unknown territory, but as a skilled craftsman following patterns perfected by master artisans centuries before his birth. This absolute faith in ancient authority created physicians who could approach the most challenging cases with unwavering calm. They never experienced the self-doubt that might make a modern doctor pause and reconsider. They never suffered the anxiety of admitting ignorance. Every symptom fit into their established framework. Every treatment had been prescribed by authorities whose wisdom was beyond question. It was a beautiful, elegant, perfectly logical system. And it was about to encounter the messy, illogical, utterly unpredictable reality of actual human bodies in need of healing. To understand how such learned, well-intentioned men could become instruments of harm, we must step inside the very halls where they received their education. Picture yourself walking through the corridors of a great medieval university, perhaps Bologna, Paris, or Montpellier, where the future healers of Europe spent years preparing for their sacred calling. The first thing that would strike you is the cold. These stone buildings, magnificent as they are, seem designed to preserve knowledge rather than comfort the living. Find a place to sit quietly in the back of one of these chambers and observe the strange ritual of medical education. In front of you, rows of young men, always men. For women are barred from such learning, sit on hard wooden benches, their hands stiff with cold as they clutch quill pens and attempt to transcribe every word their master speaks. At the front of the room stands the professor, draped in his magnificent robes, holding not a scalpel or medical instrument, but a heavy book bound in leather and clasped with iron. This is how future physicians learn their craft, not by examining bodies or observing patients, but by listening to the ancient words of long-dead authorities being read aloud, word by careful word. Listen to the professor's voice as it fills the stone chamber. According to the great Galen, the liver produces the blood, which then travels to the heart where it gains vital spirit. Notice what's missing from this scene. There are no bodies to examine, no patients to observe, no opportunities to test whether the ancient theories actually match reality. The very idea of cutting open a human corpse to study anatomy is not just forbidden. It's considered a blasphemous violation of the sacred vessel that once held a human soul. The Church has made its position clear. God created the human body as a perfect temple, and to slice it open for mere curiosity is an act of unspeakable arrogance. So instead, these future doctors spend their years in purely theoretical study. They memorize the positions of organs as described by Aristotle, who had never dissected a human being. They learn about the flow of blood according to Galen. whose understanding was based entirely on animal dissections and philosophical reasoning. They absorbed detailed descriptions of diseases and treatments that were already ancient when their professors' professors were students. Here's a fact that might make you smile in the darkness of your room. A medical student of this era could spend an entire afternoon engaged in passionate debate about the precise location of the spleen, according to Aristotelian theory. He could quote chapter and verse from multiple authorities about its size, its humoral properties, its relationship to melancholy and black bile. He could argue with scholarly precision about whether it was located more toward the left or right side of the abdomen, citing ancient Greek sources to support his position. And yet, this same student might graduate, practice medicine for decades, and die of old age without ever having laid eyes on an actual human spleen. Think about that for a moment. These weren't lazy or incurious men. They were some of the most dedicated scholars of their age, spending years mastering complex theories, learning multiple languages, committing vast texts to memory. The result of this system was both remarkable and tragic. It produced physicians who possessed an extraordinary depth of theoretical knowledge about an imaginary version of the human body. They were like master cartographers who had spent decades perfecting maps of a continent that didn't exist. Every detail on their charts was precisely rendered, every landmark carefully positioned according to the best ancient sources. The only problem was that when they tried to use these maps to navigate the real world, they led their patients not to safety, but deeper into the wilderness. Imagine trying to learn to drive a car by studying driver's manuals for 20 years, but never actually sitting behind a wheel, never turning a key in an ignition, never feeling the response of brakes beneath your foot. You might become the world's greatest expert on traffic laws and engine theory, but the first time you tried to navigate real traffic, you'd likely cause a catastrophe. The professors who taught in these halls weren't trying to mislead their students. They genuinely believed they were passing on the most valuable knowledge humanity had ever accumulated. But here's where the system became particularly insidious. It actively discouraged the kind of curiosity that might have led to genuine discovery. A student who questioned Galen's descriptions wasn't praised for critical thinking. He was corrected for showing disrespect to established authority. A young physician who suggested that direct observation might be more reliable than ancient texts wasn't seen as innovative. He was viewed as dangerously arrogant. This educational approach created doctors who approached each patient not as a unique individual requiring careful observation, but as a walking textbook case to be diagnosed according to pre-established categories. They looked for symptoms that matched the ancient descriptions rather than seeing what was actually in front of them. The most tragic irony is that these men emerged from their training more confident, not less, in their ability to heal. Chapter 2. The Deadly Arsenal, When Theory Became Tragedy. Listen carefully now, and you might hear that soft, rhythmic sound like a blade being gently sharpened against stone. It's coming from a chamber lit by the warm glow of candles, where a physician prepares his most trusted tool for the work ahead. Picture yourself as a patient in the year 1300, lying on a narrow bed in a room that smells of herbs and old wood. You've been suffering from a fever for 3 days now. And finally, your family has sent for the most learned physician in town. You can hear his measured footsteps approaching, the rustle of his long robes, and the gentle clink of metal instruments in his leather bag. He enters with the quiet confidence you've come to associate with healing, his bearded face kind but serious in the flickering candlelight. After examining your pulse and studying a sample of your urine in his crystal flask, he nods with satisfaction. "The diagnosis is clear," he says. "You have an excess of hot, corrupt blood that must be released. Now, let me describe for you the instrument he withdraws from his bag, a tool he handles with the reverence of a priest holding sacred relics. It's called a phleem, and it's beautiful in its simplicity, a small, sharp blade, no longer than your thumb, polished to mirror brightness and set into a handle of carved bone or precious wood. But here's where the process differs dramatically from anything you might expect. The physician doesn't spend time gently palpating your arm, searching for the perfect vein with careful fingers. Instead, he positions the phleem against your skin with the practiced efficiency of a carpenter marking wood for cutting. Then he picks up a small wooden stick and with one swift, decisive motion strikes the back of the phleem. The sensation is immediate and startling. You feel the warm rush of your own blood as it begins to flow freely down your arm, pooling in the ceramic bowl the physician has positioned to catch it. The blood is darker than you expected, with that deep red color that speaks of life itself flowing out of you drop by drop. The physician watches with the focused attention of an artist observing his masterpiece taking shape. "Excellent," he murmurs, his voice filled with professional satisfaction. "See how dark and thick it is. That's the corrupt humor leaving your body. You should begin to feel relief soon." And strangely, you do feel something though, whether it's relief or simply the lightheadedness that comes from losing blood. You can't quite tell. The room seems to grow softer around the edges, the sounds more distant. Your fever-heated skin begins to feel cooler, and the physician nods approvingly at this development. "Perfect," he says. "The excess heat is departing with the bad blood. We must continue until we've removed enough to restore your natural balance. But here's what neither you nor your family understands. The amount of blood considered necessary for a proper treatment would shock a modern observer into speechlessness. 2 pints is considered a moderate bloodletting. 4 pints, nearly half a gallon, is not unusual for serious cases. To put this in perspective, when you donate blood today, medical professionals take exactly 1 pint, and they monitor you carefully afterward. Medieval physicians regularly removed 4 times that amount, believing that more was always better when it came to purging corrupt humors. They had no understanding of blood volume, no concept of how much a human body could safely lose. They simply continued until they saw the signs of improvement they were looking for, which were, tragically, often the early symptoms of severe blood loss. As the bowl fills and is replaced with another, you notice how the world seems to be moving further away from you, as if you're slowly sinking beneath the surface of a warm lake. Sometimes, of course, the phleem wasn't precise enough for the physician's needs. In such cases, he might reach for an alternative approach, leeches. But these weren't simply slimy creatures grabbed from the nearest pond. Medieval leeches were precision instruments, carefully bred and maintained like the most delicate laboratory equipment. Picture the physician's leech collection, dozens of small, dark creatures kept in special glass jars filled with clean water and moss. Each leech is essentially a living needle, a small pharmacist capable of making its own incision and extracting exactly the amount of blood its appetite demands. He places them gently on your skin, perhaps along your temples if you're suffering from headaches, or near the affected organ if you have internal complaints. You feel their cool, wet bodies settling against your skin, followed by the strangest sensation, not pain, exactly, but a gentle pulling, as if someone is drawing the illness out of you through tiny straws. What creates the final tragic irony is how often these treatments appeared to work. At least initially, a patient burning with fever would indeed feel cooler after losing several pints of blood, not because the treatment was effective, but because they were sliding into shock. The weakness that followed was interpreted as the peaceful calm that comes after illness, rather than the dangerous lethargy of severe blood loss. And so, the cycle continued, day after day, patient after patient, each successful bloodletting reinforcing the physician's confidence in this most fundamental of medical arts. In another corner of our medieval physician's chamber, stored in a specially crafted glass vial with an ivory stopper, sits perhaps the most seductive killer in his entire arsenal. If you could see it in the candlelight, rolling like captured moonlight across the bottom of its container, you would understand immediately why generations of healers fell under its spell. Mercury, quicksilver, the living metal that flows like water but shines like stars. Imagine holding that vial up to the light, watching the contents shift and dance with an almost hypnotic fluidity. Here is something that defies every natural law. The medieval mind understands a metal that refuses to be solid, a substance that seems alive, moving and pooling and separating with an otherworldly grace that suggests powers beyond mortal comprehension. To the medieval physician, mercury represents nothing less than the bridge between the earthly and the divine. If God works through miraculous transformations, water into wine, bread into flesh, then surely this miraculous substance that transforms itself from solid to liquid before one's very eyes must carry within it the very essence of divine healing power. The metal gleams with an inner light that seems to pulse gently, like a captured heartbeat made visible. It's beautiful enough to be jewelry, mysterious enough to be magic, and powerful enough to be medicine. Now, let me tell you the story of Master Willem, a prosperous cloth merchant from Bruges who came to seek treatment in the spring of 1347. Willem had been suffering from a shameful disease, the French pox, as it was whispered in polite company, though we know it today as syphilis. The physician examined Willem with great care, noting the telltale signs of what he diagnosed as an excess of corrupt, heated blood mixed with poisonous vapors. The cure, he declared with confident authority, lay in mercury, the miraculous quicksilver that could chase any poison from the human body. This divine substance, the physician explained as he prepared Willem's first dose, will pursue the corruption through every corner of your body, driving it out through whatever pathway it can find. You must trust in the process, no matter how vigorous the cure may appear. The mercury was prepared as small pills, and Willem took his first dose with the hope that comes only from desperation. For the first few days, nothing seemed to change. Then, gradually, Willem began to notice something strange happening in his mouth. It started as a metallic taste. Day by day, the taste grew stronger, more persistent, until it became a permanent metallic coating on his tongue. Excellent, the physician said when Willem mentioned this. The mercury is beginning its work, seeking out the corruption in your system. That taste is the poison being drawn upward toward the mouth, where it can be expelled. But Willem's mouth had only begun its transformation. Within 2 weeks, he found himself producing enormous quantities of saliva, not the normal moisture of a healthy mouth, but streams of thin, metallic-tasting fluid that he had to constantly spit into a bowl. His physician was delighted. "Magnificent," he exclaimed. "See how the mercury is drawing the poisonous humors out through your mouth. This is precisely what we hope to achieve." As the weeks passed, Willem's condition became more dramatic. His gums began to swell and turn an angry red color. His breath took on a smell like rotting meat mixed with bitter metal. Still, the physician remained optimistic. Then Willem's teeth began to loosen, first one, then another, then several at once, until he could no longer eat solid food. Each lost tooth was celebrated by his physician as another victory. "Perfect," the learned man declared. "The corruption has been so thoroughly rooted out that it's taking the contaminated teeth with it. Your mouth is being purified from within." But perhaps most disturbing of all was what happened to Willem's hands. They began to shake a constant fine quivering that made it impossible for him to hold a quill steady enough to sign his own name. The trembling spread gradually up his arms and into his shoulders. The physician observed this development with scholarly fascination. "The mercury is chasing the last vestiges of poison from your system," he explained. "It's stirring up the corrupt humors, agitating them so thoroughly that they have nowhere left to hide. The shaking you feel is actually the battle being fought inside your body." Meanwhile, Willem found himself living in a world where every sensation had been altered by his treatment. The permanent metallic taste made food flavorless. The constant flow of saliva meant he could never rest without a bowl nearby. Yet through it all, his physician remained convinced that the treatment was working exactly as intended. Every symptom of mercury poisoning was interpreted as evidence of successful healing. The worse Willem felt, the more confident his doctor became that they were winning the battle against disease. This is perhaps the most tragic irony of medieval mercury treatment. The cure created symptoms so dramatic, so obviously connected to the medicine itself, that physicians became convinced they were witnessing the very process of healing in action. The mercury wasn't just treating the disease, it was putting on a spectacular show while it did so, with visible evidence that something powerful was happening inside the patient's body. What they couldn't see, couldn't understand, was that the quicksilver was indeed transforming everything it touched, not by driving out disease, but by slowly, systematically poisoning every organ in Willem's body with the liquid kiss of death itself. Listen carefully now, and you'll hear a sound that would have been terrifyingly familiar to anyone living near a medieval monastery or physician's workshop. It's the slow, methodical scraping of metal against bone, a sound like fingernails dragging across slate. But deeper, more resonant. Picture yourself lying on a wooden table in a chamber lit by several candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on stone walls. You are fully conscious. Medieval medicine has no understanding of general anesthesia, though your physician has kindly allowed you a cup or two of strong wine to dull the worst of what's to come. Your arms and legs are bound firmly to the table with leather straps. not out of cruelty, but from hard-earned experience. The physician has explained the necessity you've been suffering from terrible headaches, and it's clear that evil vapors, or perhaps even a small demon, has taken up residence inside your head, creating pressure that must be released. The procedure begins with the careful shaving and cleaning of a small area on your scalp. The physician selects his primary tool, a trepan, a circular cutting instrument that looks something like a small, vicious corkscrew designed for bone. Now comes the moment you've been dreading. The physician places the sharp point of the trepan against your skull with the careful precision of a carpenter marking wood for drilling. You feel the initial bite of metal into bone, followed by the strange sensation of pressure as he begins to turn the handle slowly, methodically, working the cutting edge deeper into your skull with each rotation. The sound, when it begins, seems to come from inside your own head. That grinding, scraping noise travels through your skull bones directly to your inner ear, creating a vibration that you don't just hear, but feel in every tooth, every sinus cavity. It's like having a beetle trapped inside your skull, scratching frantically to get out. As the trepan bites deeper, you begin to feel tiny fragments of bone dust settling on your face like gritty snow. The physician pauses occasionally to blow the accumulated dust away. The strangest sensation comes when the drill begins to generate heat from the friction of metal against bone. You smell something that's almost like burning hair, but with an underlying scent of copper and iron that makes your stomach turn. It's the smell of your own skull being slowly cooked by the friction of the procedure. "Excellent progress," the physician murmurs, his voice calm and reassuring despite the horror of what he's doing. "I can feel the tool beginning to break through. Soon, we'll have created the perfect opening for the corrupted vapors to escape." You feel a peculiar change in the pressure against your skull as the trepan finally breaks through the inner surface of bone and encounters the soft membrane that protects your brain. There's an almost audible pop, followed by a sensation you can only describe as deflation, as if something inside your head has suddenly been given room to expand. "Perfect," the physician exclaims with genuine satisfaction. Feel how the pressure is already beginning to ease. The evil humors that have been trapped inside your skull now have a pathway to freedom. The irony, of course, is that while the physician believes he's creating an escape route for demons and bad vapors, he's actually opened a highway for something far more dangerous: the invisible world of bacteria and infection. That small, neat hole in your skull has just become an open invitation for every microorganism in the surrounding air to take up residence in the warm, moist environment inside your head. But in this moment, as you lie there with a fresh hole drilled through your skull, you do feel a strange kind of relief. The physician carefully cleans the wound and applies a poultice of herbs that he believes will encourage proper healing while preventing any evil spirits from entering through the opening he's just created. Here's what makes this procedure particularly fascinating from a historical perspective sometimes. Incredibly, it actually worked. Archaeological excavations have uncovered skulls with clear evidence of trepanation that healed completely, with new bone growth sealing the edges of the drilled holes. These skulls tell the story of patients who not only survived having holes drilled in their heads, but lived for years afterward, their bones slowly repairing the damage done by their well-meaning healers. But for every skull that shows evidence of successful healing, How many patients died from infections that entered through their deliberately created wounds? We'll never know the true cost of this procedure. What we do know is that each successful case of trepanation reinforced the physician's faith in their methods, proving to them that their understanding of head ailments was correct. The patients who died were simply too far gone for any earthly cure to save them. In the dim corners of medieval medical practice, where candlelight struggles to illuminate the darkest arts of healing, we encounter procedures that would make even the bravest souls of today flee in terror. Picture a surgical chamber in a monastery infirmary. The stone walls blackened by decades of torch smoke. On a rough wooden table lies a patient, perhaps a knight injured in battle, or a farmer whose leg has been crushed. The decision has been made the limb cannot be saved and must be removed. But here's what would astound you most about medieval surgery speed was everything. A skilled surgeon could remove an entire leg in less than 3 minutes. This wasn't a matter of surgical prowess so much as brutal necessity, without anesthesia beyond perhaps a leather strap to bite down on and a strong cup of wine. The only mercy a surgeon could offer was to finish the job before shock and pain rendered the patient unconscious or dead. Listen to the sounds that would fill such a chamber. First, the scrape of metal being sharpened one final time. Then the surgeon's calm voice, explaining to his assistants exactly where they should hold the patient, how to apply the tourniquet, when to have the hot iron ready for cauterization. When the cutting begins, the sound is unlike anything you might imagine. It's not the clean slice of a modern scalpel through flesh, but the determined sawing of a blade designed more for carpentry than medicine. But it's when the bone saw comes out that the real horror begins. The rhythmic back and forth motion creates a grinding sound that seems to emanate from the very depths of the earth, while bone dust rises in small clouds. And threading through it all, the patient screams raw, animal sounds that speak to the most primitive fears of human suffering. The surgeon never pauses, never shows mercy, because he knows that hesitation means death. Now, you might think that such a traumatic procedure would demand the highest standards of cleanliness, but you would be profoundly mistaken. The concept of hygiene, as we understand it, simply doesn't exist. Instead, the opposite is true. A surgeon's blood-stained apron is worn like a badge of honor, each stain a testament to his experience and skill. Picture the surgeon's leather apron, dark with years of accumulated blood, pus, and other bodily fluids. It's never washed. Why would it be? Each stain tells a story of a life saved. The more stained the apron, the more experienced the surgeon must be. Patients and their families actually find comfort in seeing these grisly decorations, interpreting them as evidence that they're in capable hands. The surgical instruments are cleaned, if at all, by wiping them on the surgeon's already filthy apron, or perhaps rinsing them briefly in a basin of water that's been used for multiple procedures. But perhaps even stranger than the surgical practices are the pharmaceutical remedies that medieval physicians prescribed with complete confidence. Consider one of the most popular treatments for wounds, the famous weapon salve, a concoction that defied all logic yet was used throughout Europe for centuries. The theory behind weapon salve was beautifully simple and completely insane. When someone was injured by a sword, knife, or arrow, the physician would carefully clean and dress the wound with basic bandages. But the real treatment, The magical healing ointment was applied not to the wound itself, but to the weapon that had caused it. The logic, according to medieval medical theory, was unassailable. The weapon and the wound shared a mystical connection. By healing the weapon with powerful medicines, the physician could cure the wound without subjecting the patient to potentially harmful direct treatments. It was medicine by proxy, healing by remote control. But the ingredients that went into medieval pharmaceuticals were perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. A typical apothecary's shop would contain substances that would horrify a modern pharmacist. Powdered mummy, imported at great expense from Egypt, was considered one of the most potent healing substances available. The dried and ground flesh of ancient pharaohs was thought to contain concentrated life force. Even more macabre was the use of usnea, a type of moss that grew specifically on human skulls left exposed to the elements. This greenish fungus, carefully harvested from the bones of executed criminals or battlefield dead, was considered particularly potent for treating head wounds and mental ailments. Animal dung played a prominent role in many remedies, with different types prescribed for different ailments. These weren't desperate folk remedies. They were sophisticated treatments prescribed by learned physicians and carefully prepared by trained apothecaries. In the quiet chambers where life begins its most perilous journey, medieval medicine revealed perhaps its most tragic contradictions. Picture two very different scenes of childbirth, separated not by centuries, but by social class. In a modest cottage on the edge of town, a young woman labors through the long hours of bringing her child into the world. Around her gather the village midwives, women whose knowledge comes not from ancient texts, but from countless nights spent in chambers just like this one. Their hands know exactly how to guide a baby's journey, how to ease a mother's pain. They know the ancient arts of massage and understand the importance of patience. When complications arise, these midwives know remedies that actually work, herbal teas that ease pain without causing harm, positioning techniques that can turn a breech baby, gentle manipulations that can free a child caught in the birth canal. Most importantly, they know when to simply sit quietly and let the mysterious process of birth unfold. But now, imagine a very different scene, taking place in the grand manor house of a wealthy merchant. Here, when labor grows difficult, the family can afford to summon the most learned physician in the region. The physician arrives with his bag of instruments and his unwavering confidence in medical theories. Unlike the patient midwives, he believes that intervention is almost always superior to waiting. He sees the birthing process not as a natural phenomenon to be gently assisted, but as a medical crisis to be actively managed. His first instinct, when faced with a laboring woman, is often to address what he perceives as an excess of blood, even as the mother struggles with the exhausting work of childbirth. He may insist on bloodletting. Picture the tragic scene: a woman already depleted by hours of labor, further weakened by the deliberate removal of blood at the very moment when she needs all her strength. When the physician grows impatient with the pace of delivery, he reaches for his obstetric tools, crude metal forceps designed to extract a stubborn child from the womb. These instruments, crafted by blacksmiths rather than precision toolmakers, often cause terrible injuries to both mother and child, creating wounds and tears that lead to infections and complications far worse than the original difficulty. The most heartbreaking irony is that the very symbol of prosperity, the ability to afford a learned physician's services, often became a harbinger of tragedy. Families who celebrated their good fortune in securing the best medical care available were unknowingly placing their loved ones in greater danger than their poorer neighbors who could afford only the services of experienced midwives. So many wealthy women died, not despite receiving the finest medical attention available, but because of it. Their deaths, a tragic testament to the lethal combination of confidence and ignorance that characterized medieval medicine. Chapter 3. The Madness of Method. Why did no one stop? Listen to the steady rhythm of time passing. Tick, 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 like the sound of a clock that refuses to acknowledge that something has gone terribly wrong. To understand how entire civilizations could continue down such a destructive path for so long, we must first grasp the seductive logic that drove every tragic escalation. Medieval medicine operated on a principle so simple, so seemingly reasonable, that it's almost impossible to argue with. If a small amount of medicine doesn't cure the patient, then obviously more medicine is needed. This wasn't stupidity or cruelty. It was logic. Imagine you're trying to clean a stain from a piece of cloth. If a little soap doesn't work, you use more soap. The stain's persistence isn't evidence that soap is the wrong approach. It's evidence that you need to be more aggressive in applying the right approach. Now let me tell you the story of Thomas, a baker from Canterbury in the year 1314, whose journey through the medieval medical system illustrates perfectly how this logic of escalation worked in practice. It begins simply enough. Thomas develops what we would recognize today as mild indigestion. His stomach feels unsettled. He has little appetite, and he experiences occasional cramping, like any sensible man. Thomas first tries the simplest remedy available. He visits the local herbalist and purchases a small vial of herbal tincture designed to settle the stomach. He takes it faithfully for 3 days. But Thomas's stomach continues to trouble him. The cramping persists, and now he's also experiencing some nausea. Clearly, the herbalist's simple remedy isn't strong enough. It's time to seek more sophisticated help. Thomas visits the local physician, a learned man who immediately recognizes the symptoms as evidence of corrupt humors gathering in the digestive tract. The solution is obvious. The bowels must be thoroughly cleansed. Thomas receives a prescription for a powerful purgative, a mixture designed to empty his intestines completely. The treatment is remarkably effective in one sense. Thomas spends the next 2 days emptying his bowels with a thoroughness that leaves him weak and dehydrated. But when the purging finally stops, his stomach pain hasn't improved. If anything, he feels worse. The physician examines his pale, weakened patient and nods with understanding. Clearly, the corruption in Thomas's system is more deeply rooted. The purgatives have done their work, but the source of the problem must lie in the blood itself. It's time for bloodletting. Thomas finds himself lying on the physician's table as a phlegm opens his vein and his blood flows steadily into a ceramic bowl. He watches the dark red stream and feels a strange sense of hope. The physician removes what he considers a moderate amount, about 2 pints, and carefully bandages the wound. For the next few days, Thomas does feel different. The weakness from blood loss creates a strange floating sensation that he initially mistakes for improvement. But as his strength begins to return, so does the original discomfort, now accompanied by the additional weakness of significant blood loss. The physician is puzzled but not discouraged. He's dealing with a particularly stubborn case. But stubborn cases simply require more aggressive treatment. It's time to bring out the most powerful weapon in the medieval medical arsenal, mercury. Thomas begins taking small doses of quicksilver, trusting in his physician's explanation that this miraculous substance will chase the corruption from his system. Within weeks, the metallic taste in his mouth becomes permanent. His gums begin to swell, and his hands develop a barely noticeable tremor. But here's where the tragic logic becomes most clear. Each new symptom is interpreted not as evidence that the treatment is harmful, but as proof that it's working. The metallic taste means the mercury is engaging with the corruption. The swollen gums indicate that toxins are being drawn out through the mouth. The trembling hands show that the quicksilver is agitating the diseased humors. Thomas, meanwhile, has moved far beyond his original simple stomach upset. What began as mild indigestion has become a complex medical crisis involving multiple organ systems. His digestive tract has been traumatized, his blood volume depleted, and his nervous system slowly poisoned. The physician observes Thomas's deteriorating health with genuine concern, but also with professional pride. This is obviously a very serious case, much more complex than it initially appeared. The fact that it's requiring such intensive treatment only proves how fortunate Thomas is to be under the care of a truly skilled practitioner. A lesser physician might have been satisfied with simple herb teas, allowing the corruption to fester until it killed the patient. And here lies the heart of medieval medicine's tragic logic. The worse the patient became, the more convinced the physician became that he was fighting a worthy battle against a formidable enemy. Each escalation seemed not just justified, but heroic. The patient wasn't suffering from medical treatment. He was suffering from disease so serious that it required the most aggressive treatment available. Thomas's body had become a battlefield. But in the physician's mind, he was the noble general leading the fight against corruption and disease. Picture, if you will, a magnificent castle built entirely without windows. Its walls are thick stone, impervious to weather, and its towers reach high into the sky with absolute confidence in their own grandeur. Inside this fortress, everything makes perfect sense. The inhabitants have developed elaborate explanations for every sound, every shadow, every change in temperature. They have created a complete world of understanding that requires no external validation because it provides its own internal logic for everything that occurs. This is the psychological fortress that medieval medicine built around itself, a system so perfectly self-contained, so elegantly self-justifying, that it became essentially immune to evidence. Every possible outcome, every conceivable result, could be interpreted as proof that the system was working exactly as intended. Let's follow the gentle logic of this closed loop. As soothing and predictable as the rhythm of waves against a shore, when a patient recovered after treatment, the explanation was beautifully simple. The physician's intervention had successfully restored the proper balance of humors. The recovery proved the diagnosis was correct and the treatment was effective. Case closed. Theory confirmed. Confidence reinforced. But what happened when patients didn't recover? What occurred when they grew worse? or when they died despite the physician's best efforts. Did this challenge the fundamental assumptions of medieval medicine? Not at all. The system had evolved perfect explanations for failure that actually strengthened rather than weakened faith in the underlying principles. If a patient died, there were three primary explanations. First, the disease itself was simply too advanced, too deeply rooted for any earthly intervention to overcome it. This didn't mean the treatment was wrong. It meant the corruption was extraordinarily virulent, requiring even more aggressive treatment than was possible. The second explanation was equally perfect. In its circular logic, the patient had simply waited too long before seeking proper medical care. If only they had come sooner. If only the family hadn't wasted precious time with folk remedies or prayers. Then the physician's treatments would have been successful. The failure lay not in the medicine, but in the timing. If you had brought her to me when the symptoms first appeared, the physician might say, the bloodletting would have prevented the humors from becoming so thoroughly corrupted. By the time I saw her, the opportunity for a complete cure had already passed. And then there was the third explanation, the most unassailable of all divine will. God, in His infinite wisdom, had decided to call this soul to heaven. No amount of medical skill could override the Almighty's decision. The physician had been merely an instrument of divine will, doing his earthly duty. Do you see how beautifully this system protected itself? Every success validated the theory, and every failure could be explained in ways that actually reinforced confidence in the underlying approach. But there's an even deeper psychological mechanism at work here, one that made it virtually impossible for individual physicians to recognize or acknowledge errors, to admit that a treatment was harmful, that a diagnosis was wrong, that a patient died because of rather than despite medical intervention. This wasn't just admitting a personal mistake. It was challenging the entire foundation upon which medical knowledge rested. Consider the impossible position of a medieval physician who began to suspect that bloodletting might be harmful. To voice such a concern would be suggesting that Galen, the great authority, was fundamentally mistaken. It would imply that centuries of learned men, thousands of respected physicians, entire universities devoted to medical education, were all perpetuating dangerous errors. The psychological weight of such a revelation would be crushing. It would mean that a physician's entire education, his life's work, his professional identity was built on foundations of sand. It would require him to acknowledge that he had spent years harming rather than helping, that his interventions had caused suffering rather than relief. And so the fortress walls grew ever thicker, ever more impenetrable to doubt. Protecting the theory became more important than questioning the results. Maintaining faith in ancient authorities took precedence over observing contemporary outcomes. The system's need to justify itself overwhelmed any impulse to examine whether it actually worked. Inside this windowless castle, every sound from outside could be interpreted according to internal rules. The screams of patients became evidence of corruption being expelled. The silence of death became proof of divine judgment. The tears of families became testimony to the severity of diseases that required the most aggressive treatments available. Now, let us follow a different kind of trail through our medieval medical landscape, not the path of good intentions or scholarly theories, but the quiet, persistent flow of coins from desperate hands into the purses of learned men. Listen carefully, and you might hear the soft clink of silver changing hands, the rustle of silk purses being opened in darkened chambers. There's a beautiful, terrible irony hidden in the economics of medieval medicine. The most effective treatments rest, clean water, simple herbal teas. The patient care of experienced women generated almost no profit for anyone. But consider the economic incentives facing a learned physician. Telling a wealthy merchant to go home, rest in bed, drink plenty of clean water, and wait for his body to heal itself might cure the patient, but it would also send the doctor away with empty pockets and a reputation for providing services that anyone's grandmother could offer. Contrast this with the magnificent spectacle of a proper medical treatment, weeks of careful observation, multiple consultations, precise bloodletting performed with expensive instruments, rare and exotic medicines imported from distant lands, detailed astrological charts calculated for each intervention. Such a comprehensive treatment plan could keep a physician profitably employed for months, demonstrating his vast learning while generating substantial fees. Picture this scene in a wealthy household where the master has fallen ill. The family summons the most expensive physician available, not because they want their loved one to suffer, but because they want to demonstrate their devotion. The physician arrives with his impressive array of tools and medicines. Each day brings new developments. The patient's humors must be tested, his blood examined, his astrological chart consulted. The family watches with gratitude as their expensive healer performs his elaborate rituals, seeing evidence of their money being well spent. Meanwhile, in the humble cottage of a poor farmer, a very different drama unfolds. When illness strikes this family, they cannot afford to summon learned physicians or purchase expensive medicines. They rely instead on the accumulated wisdom of generations' bed rest, simple broths, herbal teas made from plants growing wild in nearby fields. The patient recovers slowly, without drama, without expensive intervention, without anyone profiting from their suffering. Here lies one of history's most cruel paradoxes. The poor often survived simply because they couldn't afford to be cured to death by expensive medicine. The farmer's family mourned their inability to provide proper medical care, never realizing that their poverty had actually protected their loved one from treatments far more dangerous than the original illness. They felt guilty about their reliance on folk remedies, unaware that these gentle approaches often worked better than the aggressive interventions available to their wealthier neighbors. The economics became even more perverse when we examine the medicines themselves. The most expensive treatments were often the most exotic, the most rare, the most removed from anything resembling effective medical intervention. Ground unicorn horn. Actually, the tusk of a narwhal could cost more than a prosperous merchant earned in an entire year. Bezoar stones. Those calcified masses occasionally found in the stomachs of certain animals were literally worth their weight in gold. These were prices that reflected medieval society's fundamental belief that the most powerful medicines must naturally be the most expensive ones. The trade in powdered mummy created an entire industry built on the systematic desecration of ancient graves. Egyptian tombs were ransacked not for their gold, but for the dried flesh of pharaohs that European physicians believed contained concentrated life force. Wealthy patients paid enormous sums for medicines made from the ground-up remains of people dead for thousands of years. Consider the psychological trap this created for both physicians and patients. A doctor who charged modest fees for simple treatments appeared to be providing inferior care after all. How could something inexpensive be truly effective against serious illness? Patients and their families wanted to see their money being put to dramatic use, wanted visible evidence that they were receiving treatment worthy of their investment. This economic pressure pushed physicians toward ever more elaborate and expensive interventions. A simple bloodletting was sufficient for minor ailments, but serious conditions required multiple sessions, rare medicines, complex astrological calculations, and extended periods of careful observation. The more a family paid, the more dramatic the treatment became, and the more likely their loved one was to suffer serious harm from the very care they had purchased. And so, medieval medicine created its own economic ecosystem, one that fed on human suffering and grew stronger with each tragic failure. In the shadowed corridors of medieval society, where the boundaries between earthly knowledge and divine mystery blurred, medicine found itself wrapped in layers of protection that made it virtually immune to challenge or change. To understand why medieval medicine persisted unchanged for so many centuries, we must first understand that illness itself was never seen as merely a physical phenomenon. In the medieval mind, disease was intimately connected to the spiritual realm, a manifestation of the eternal struggle between good and evil playing out within the human body. When someone fell ill, the learned men of the time saw not just corrupted humors or imbalanced blood, but evidence of sin, divine judgment, or supernatural intervention. Picture a typical consultation in a monastery infirmary, where the soft murmur of Latin prayers mingles with the physician's careful examination of a patient's symptoms. The doctor doesn't work alone. Beside him stands a priest, equally concerned with the patient's spiritual state. This partnership wasn't merely ceremonial. Medieval physicians genuinely believed that physical healing was impossible without addressing the spiritual corruption that had allowed disease to take hold. They saw themselves not just as healers of the body, but as soldiers in God's army, fighting against the forces of darkness. Their treatments weren't just medical procedures, they were religious rituals, blessed by priests and sanctified by centuries of Christian tradition. Consider how this divine sanction protected medieval medicine from criticism. When someone questioned a physician's methods, they weren't just challenging medical theory, they were implicitly questioning God's plan. If a patient died despite receiving the finest medical care available, the explanation was beautifully simple and completely unassailable. God had chosen to call that soul home. The physician had faithfully performed his earthly duties, applying the healing knowledge that divine providence had revealed through ancient authorities like Galen and Hippocrates. This created an extraordinary shield around medical practice. Families who might otherwise have questioned why their loved one grew worse after treatment found themselves silenced by the suggestion that such doubts bordered on blasphemy. The protection was mutual and reinforcing. The Church benefited from its association with learned medicine, and the physicians benefited from the Church's spiritual authority. Together, they formed an alliance that was nearly impossible to challenge. But perhaps even more powerful than religious protection was the sheer weight of tradition. In a world where stability was prized above innovation, where the wisdom of the ancients was considered superior to any contemporary insight, the very age of medical knowledge became its strongest argument for truth. Imagine the psychological impossibility facing anyone who dared to suggest that the ancient authorities might be wrong. To challenge Galen's theories wasn't just questioning one man's ideas, it was suggesting that 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom was fundamentally mistaken. Moreover, medieval society was structured around the principle of hierarchy and respect for authority. Students learned by memorizing the words of their masters. Masters gained their authority by demonstrating perfect knowledge of ancient texts. And the entire system depended on the assumption that wisdom flowed downward from the greatest minds of the past. In such a world, innovation wasn't just discouraged, it was seen as a form of arrogance. A young physician who suggested that his own observations contradicted the teachings of Galen would be viewed not as a bold scientific pioneer, but as an insolent upstart. The few voices that did occasionally rise to question established medical practice found themselves quickly silenced by this combination of religious and traditional authority. The system had evolved perfect mechanisms for protecting itself against the inconvenient intrusion of actual evidence. And so, medieval medicine wrapped itself in layer upon layer of protection, the authority of ancient texts, the blessing of religious sanction, the weight of tradition. But even in the deepest darkness, there are always a few small lights that flicker against the overwhelming shadow, like lonely candles burning in distant windows, scattered across the vast landscape of medieval ignorance. There were occasionally individuals who dared to whisper truths that their world was not ready to hear. Listen carefully, and you might catch the echo of these forgotten voices, speaking across the centuries. In the great libraries of Baghdad, during the height of Islamic scholarship, a Persian physician named Al-Razi bent over his writing desk, crafting words that would have shocked his European contemporaries, with the patient precision of a man who had spent decades actually watching sick people. He wrote that careful observation of patients was more valuable than all the ancient theories combined. The authority of Galen and Aristotle, he dared to suggest, should not prevent us from believing our own eyes. He described diseases with meticulous attention. His writings filled with careful observations based on evidence rather than authority. Centuries later, in the surgical halls of medieval France, another lonely voice raised itself against the darkness. Henri de Mondeville, a surgeon who had seen too many wounds fester and too many patients die from what were called good infections, committed the heresy of suggesting that pus was not, in fact, a sign of proper healing. Wounds should be kept clean, he wrote with the quiet authority of someone who had learned his lessons not from books, but from the countless patients whose flesh had taught him the difference between healing and putrefaction. He advocated for cleanliness in surgery, for gentle treatment of wounds, for the revolutionary idea that deliberately creating infection was not a wise medical practice. But these voices, clear and true as they were, fell upon ears that had been carefully trained not to listen. Al-Razi was dismissed as an eccentric. De Mondeville was regarded as a troublemaker. Their insights were filed away, forgotten, buried beneath centuries of continued adherence to the old ways. Chapter 4: The Human Experience, Surviving the Nightmare. You lie in your bed, and the fever burns through you like slow fire, making your skin feel both burning hot and shivering cold at the same time. The rough woolen blankets scratch against your sensitized flesh. Then you hear them footsteps in the hallway. Not the quick, light steps of your wife or children, but the measured, deliberate pace of someone who carries authority. the physician has arrived. Your heart begins to beat faster, but not with relief or hope. Instead, a cold dread settles in your stomach. You know what those footsteps mean? The sharp bite of the phlegm, the weakness that follows as your blood flows away, the bitter, metallic taste of mercury, the burning sensation of purgatives. You've seen this before, watched it happen to your neighbors, your friends. You've witnessed the ritual of medieval healing, and your body remembers. People often grow worse, not better, after the physician's visit. The door opens with a soft creak of hinges, and candlelight spills into your darkened room. You see his silhouette tall, imposing, wrapped in robes that seem to absorb the flickering light. When he speaks, it's not to you, but about you. His voice, carrying confident authority. Observing the patient's complexion and the quality of perspiration, he murmurs to your assembled family. Combined with the astrological indicators, suggests a dangerous excess of sanguine humor. The words wash over you like water over stone. Latin phrases mixed with technical terms you don't understand. You catch fragments, humoral imbalance, planetary influences, necessary intervention, but they float past your consciousness like leaves on a stream. You want to speak, to tell them about the exact nature of your pain, but no one asks for your opinion. Your experience of your own body is considered irrelevant compared to the physician's theoretical knowledge. Instead, you lie there and listen as decisions are made about your flesh, your blood, your future. The physician's voice remains calm and assured as he outlines his treatment plan: bloodletting, purgatives, and perhaps mercury. Your family nods along, grateful to be in the presence of such learning. But your body knows better. Even in your fevered state, some primitive part of your brain screams warnings that you cannot voice. When the physician approaches with his leather bag of instruments, every muscle in your body tenses with an instinctive desire to flee. Your hands grip the bed sheets unconsciously. Your breathing becomes shallow. This is the terrible contradiction at the heart of your experience. Your mind tells you to trust this learned man. Society has taught you that education means understanding, that formal training trumps mere bodily sensation, that the pain you feel is less important than the theories that explain it. Yet every fiber of your being recoils from what is about to happen. Your body remembers the weakness that follows bloodletting, the way the world grows dim and distant as your life force drains away. It remembers the burning agony of mercury poisoning. It remembers watching others grow pale and weak under the physician's care. The internal conflict tears at you. Part of you desperately wants to believe that this suffering has meaning, that the learned man possesses knowledge that can transform your agony into healing. You've been taught from childhood to respect authority. But another part of you, the part that exists below conscious thought, knows that you are about to be harmed by the very person your family has brought to heal you. This knowledge sits in your stomach like a stone, cold and heavy and undeniable. You cannot voice these fears without seeming ungrateful, without appearing to challenge the entire structure of knowledge and authority that supports your world. So you remain silent, trapped between your body's primitive wisdom and your society's sophisticated ignorance. You submit to treatments that every instinct tells you to refuse, comforted by explanations that your mind accepts, even as your flesh rebels against their implementation. This is your reality as a medieval patient, to be simultaneously the most important person in the room and the least important voice in determining what happens to your own body. You are the subject of intense concern and complete disregard, the center of attention and utterly powerless. As the physician prepares his instruments and begins to explain to your family why your blood must be let, you close your eyes and try to find some small corner of peace within yourself, some quiet place where you can retreat while your body endures what your mind cannot prevent. You whisper a prayer, not for healing, but for survival, not for the success of the treatment, but for the strength to endure it. You sit in the wooden chair beside the bed, your hands clasped so tightly that your knuckles have turned white, watching the person you love most in this world grow weaker with each passing day. The irony cuts deep. They are receiving the finest medical care your family can afford. Yet with each visit from the learned physician, they seem to fade a little more. 3 weeks ago, when the fever first took hold, your spouse was weak but still themselves. Now, after multiple bloodlettings and the beginning of the mercury treatment, they lie pale as winter snow, their breathing shallow, their eyes struggling to focus. The physician assures you that this is progress. See how the corrupt humors are being drawn from the body. He says with satisfaction, the pallor indicates that the excess heat is being successfully expelled. The weakness is temporary, a sign that the treatment is working exactly as intended. You nod and try to feel grateful. Try to find comfort in his confident words. After all, he is the most educated man you know, someone who has studied at great universities. When he speaks, it's with the assurance of someone who has never doubted that knowledge can triumph over suffering. But late at night, when you're left alone with your fears, you cannot shake the feeling that something is terribly wrong. You remember how your spouse looked before the treatments began, sick. Yes, but still present, still fighting. Now they seem to be disappearing before your eyes. The financial burden weighs on you almost as heavily. Last month, you sold the family's best milk cow to pay for the physician's initial consultations. The week before that, you traded your grandmother's silver pendant to purchase the special mercury pills that the learned doctor insisted were essential for a complete cure. Now you find yourself calculating costs with the desperate precision of someone watching their entire world collapse one coin at a time. Each visit from the physician means another fee. Each new medicine requires more money than your family has ever possessed. You've borrowed from neighbors, from your brother, from anyone willing to extend credit. You lie awake at night, your mind churning between two equally terrible worries. On one side is your beloved's deteriorating condition. On the other side is the mounting debt that threatens to destroy your family's future. You're trapped between love and financial ruin. The worst part is how hope and despair have become tangled together. Every morning, you wake with renewed faith that today will bring improvement. When he arrives, you search his face for signs of encouragement. Hang on his every word as he explains the subtle progress he claims to observe. The treatment is proceeding exactly as expected. He tells you with calm authority. These cases often appear to worsen before they improve. We must trust in the process. You believe him because you have to believe him. The alternative, accepting that the most expensive, most sophisticated medical care available might actually be harmful, is simply too terrible to contemplate. If you cannot trust this learned man, then you must accept that there is no hope at all. So you continue to scrape together the coins for each new treatment. Continue to nod respectfully when the physician explains why the mercury dosage must be increased or why additional bloodletting has become necessary. You tell yourself that the mounting expenses are an investment in your family's future, that the growing weakness you observe is simply part of the healing process, that your fears are born of ignorance rather than intuition. But when the worst finally happens, when you wake one morning to find that the person you've loved and protected and sacrificed everything to save has slipped away during the night, the guilt crashes over you like a wave of ice-cold water. Perhaps you called the physician too late. Perhaps, if you had acted sooner, the treatments would have been more effective. Perhaps you should have found a way to afford the more expensive medicines. Perhaps you should have sold the house, borrowed more money, begged more desperately for the funds needed to provide truly comprehensive care. Perhaps your loved one died not because medicine failed, but because you failed to provide them with enough medicine, quickly enough, expensively enough. The thought that the very treatments you sacrificed everything to provide might have hastened this tragedy is too painful to entertain. It's easier to believe that you didn't do enough than to accept that you might have done too much. Easier to blame your own limitations than to question the fundamental assumptions about healing that have structured your entire understanding of how the world works. But listen now to a different kind of story, one that whispers through the shadows of medieval history, like a candle flame that refuses to be extinguished. Because sometimes, not often, but sometimes people did survive. Not just their original ailments, but the elaborate treatments designed to cure them. And these rare stories of survival would become, in their own tragic way, some of the most dangerous weapons in medieval medicine's arsenal. Picture Robert the Miller, a sturdy man who fell ill with what we might recognize today as a severe case of food poisoning. His family summoned the finest physician in their region. The physician diagnosed an acute imbalance of hot, corrupt humors. The treatment plan was comprehensive aggressive bloodletting, powerful purgatives, and a carefully calculated dose of mercury to chase any remaining corruption from his system. By all rights, Robert should have died, but Robert was blessed with something that no medieval physician understood: a constitution so robust, a body so fundamentally healthy that it could survive both the original illness and the aggressive attempts to cure it. His liver was strong enough to process the mercury. His cardiovascular system was resilient enough to recover from severe blood loss. His digestive tract gradually healed itself once the treatments ended. More importantly, Robert's original illness, the food poisoning, was the kind of ailment that often resolves itself given time. While the physician's treatments were slowly poisoning him, his own immune system was quietly doing the real work of healing. After 6 weeks of treatment, Robert began to recover. He was still weak from blood loss, still dealing with the lingering effects of mercury poisoning. But he was alive. More than alive, he was being hailed as a medical miracle, living proof of the power of learned medicine. The physician was justifiably proud of his success. Here was vindication of everything he had learned, confirmation that the ancient authorities had been right. Robert's recovery became the cornerstone of the doctor's reputation, the case study he would reference for years to come. Observe the power of proper medical intervention, the physician would say. This man was at death's door. Without bloodletting to remove the poisoned blood, without purgatives to cleanse the contaminated bowels, without mercury to chase the corruption from his very bones, he would certainly have perished. Yet here he stands, living testimony to the effectiveness of learned medicine. What the physician didn't mention, because he didn't understand it himself, was that Robert had survived not because of the treatments, but despite them. He was a statistical anomaly, a lucky outlier whose survival had nothing to do with the theoretical framework that supposedly explained it. But Robert's story spread throughout the region like ripples on a pond. Other families heard about the miracle cure, about the learned physician whose aggressive treatments had snatched a dying man from the very jaws of death. When their own loved ones fell ill, they specifically requested the same doctor, the same dramatic interventions. None of them heard about the other patients, the 10 or 12 people who had received similar treatments and died from them. Those stories weren't told. The dead couldn't testify to the physician's skill. And so, one survivor's story drowned out a dozen tragedies, creating a powerful myth that drew more victims into the same deadly cycle. But there was another force at work in some of these survival stories, something even more mysterious than physical resilience. Sometimes, the sheer power of belief seemed to tip the scales toward life. When patients and their families had absolute faith in the physician's wisdom, that belief itself became a kind of medicine. Picture Margaret the Weaver, lying in her bed after 3 days of fever, weak but not yet seriously ill. The physician had explained that her condition was grave but treatable, that the bloodletting and herbal preparations he prescribed would certainly restore her. Margaret, surrounded by the love and confidence of her family, infused with absolute trust in the learned man's wisdom, felt a peace settle over her that seemed to strengthen her body's own healing processes. Her mind, freed from the corrosive effects of fear and despair, allowed her natural recovery mechanisms to work unimpeded. The treatments themselves were harmful, but her faith in them created a psychological environment that promoted healing. She recovered, not because mercury and bloodletting were effective, but because her belief in their effectiveness allowed her body to heal itself while enduring their assault. These psychological recoveries were perhaps the most tragic of all, because they provided the most convincing evidence for treatments that were fundamentally harmful. And so, medieval medicine fed on its own rare successes, growing stronger and more confident with each unlikely survivor. Each patient who managed to live through both their illness and their cure. These lucky few became unwitting collaborators in a system that would kill thousands. Their survival stories serving as deadly advertisements for treatments that destroyed far more lives than they saved. Listen now to the sound of time itself shifting, like the barely perceptible moment when night begins to surrender to dawn. It took centuries long, patient centuries during which countless lives were lost to well-intentioned ignorance, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Picture the workshops of the Renaissance, where candlelight gives way to the cleaner illumination of oil lamps, where the scratch of quills on parchment mingles with new sounds, the whisper of fresh paper, the clink of improved glass instruments, the quiet conversations of men asking different kinds of questions. In the University of Padua, in the year 1543, a young Flemish physician named Andreas Vesalius does something that would have horrified his medieval predecessors. With his own hands, he carefully, methodically dissects human corpses, mapping the actual geography of the human body rather than relying on ancient descriptions. His fingers trace the real pathways of blood vessels, measure the actual dimensions of organs. When Vesalius publishes his findings, he doesn't just correct a few minor errors in Galen's work. He reveals that the entire foundation of medieval anatomy was built on observations of animal bodies incorrectly applied to human beings. The great authority, whose words had been treated as scripture for centuries, had been systematically wrong. Imagine the quiet revolution contained in such a discovery. For the first time in over a millennium, direct observation was challenging written authority. The evidence of human senses was being valued above the testimony of ancient texts. Around the same time, in the laboratories and workshops of Switzerland, a controversial physician calling himself Paracelsus began advocating ideas that seemed both radical and commonsensible, though he still believed in many things we would consider superstitious. He introduced a concept that would eventually revolutionize medicine: the importance of dosage. The dose makes the poison, Paracelsus declared, suggesting that any substance could be either helpful or harmful depending on the amount administered. This simple insight began to chip away at medieval medicine's faith in aggressive intervention, introducing the revolutionary idea that more was not always better. But perhaps most importantly, a new way of thinking about knowledge itself began to take root in the minds of curious individuals across Europe. Instead of seeking truth in ancient books, they began to develop what we now call the scientific method, the simple but revolutionary idea that you should observe what actually happens. Test your theories against reality and record the results honestly. This approach seems so obvious to us now that it's hard to imagine how radical it was at the time. For over 1,000 years, knowledge had flowed downward from authority to student, from ancient text to modern practice. The idea that a contemporary observer might discover something new, something that contradicted established wisdom, required a complete transformation in how people thought about truth itself. Slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape that has known only darkness, this new approach began to spread. It was the beginning of the end for the kind of medicine that had dominated human healing for so many centuries, the dawn after a very long and very dark night. And now, here you are, lying in the warmth and safety of your own time, wrapped in blankets that were woven by machines, breathing air that has been filtered, resting in a world where the terrors we've explored have become nothing more than historical curiosities. Take a moment to feel the softness of your pillow against your cheek, the gentle weight of covers that keep you warm. Listen to the quiet hum of modern life around you, perhaps the whisper of an air conditioning system regulating the temperature with precision that would have seemed magical, or the distant sound of traffic moving along roads lit by electric lights. The next time you feel unwell and reach for a simple over-the-counter medication, pause for just a moment. When you swallow that small, precisely measured tablet, calculated to contain exactly the right amount of active ingredient, tested in laboratories, approved by regulatory agencies that demand proof of both safety and effectiveness, think of the people who had no such luxuries, who had to trust their lives to treatments based on theories rather than evidence. When you visit a doctor and they wash their hands before examining you, when they use sterile instruments and disposable gloves, when they explain what they're doing and ask for your permission before proceeding. Remember the patients who had no voice in their own treatment, no protection from the contamination that medical procedures once carried. Consider the miracle that happens when you receive an antibiotic injection. How millions of bacteria that might once have meant certain death are quietly eliminated by medicines so precisely targeted that they can distinguish between the microorganisms that threaten you and the ones your body needs to remain healthy. But perhaps the most wonderful thing about modern medicine isn't its knowledge, impressive as that knowledge may be. The most remarkable transformation isn't in what doctors know, but in how they think about what they don't know. The greatest difference between a modern physician and a medieval one isn't found in their education, or their tools, or their understanding of anatomy. It lies in something much simpler and yet much more profound: the modern doctor's ability to say, with professional confidence and without shame, "I'm not sure. Let's find out together." This willingness to acknowledge uncertainty, to admit the limits of current knowledge, to approach each patient as a unique individual rather than a textbook case, this represents perhaps the most revolutionary change in the entire history of healing. Where medieval physicians found their authority in absolute certainty about theories that were completely wrong, modern medicine finds its strength in systematic uncertainty about facts that can be tested, verified, and gradually understood. The very humility that would have been seen as professional weakness in medieval times has become the cornerstone of genuinely effective healing. Our story draws to its close now, like the final notes of a lullaby fading into the peaceful silence of a safe and gentle night. The ghosts of medieval medicine have retreated into the shadows of history where they belong, their voices growing fainter until they become nothing more than whispered memories of a time when healing and harming wore the same robes. But that time is gone now, dissolved into the past like morning mist before the sun. Around you, your room holds only quietude and comfort. There is no sound of blades being sharpened, no acrid smell of mercury being prepared, no hushed conversations about corrupt humors. There are only the gentle sounds of your own peaceful world, perhaps the soft sigh of wind through trees outside your window, or the distant hum of a world that sleeps safely under the protection of knowledge earned through centuries of careful learning. Feel your body settling deeper into the comfort that surrounds you. Let your shoulders drop a little further. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of rest, the weight of the day. Whatever burdens it may have carried can slide away now like water flowing downhill, leaving you clean and light and ready for the restorative peace that sleep brings. Your mind, too, can let go of its careful attention now. You've journeyed with me through chambers lit by candlelight. Listen to stories of times when good intentions led to tragic outcomes. Witness the slow transformation of human understanding. These stories are part of you now, woven into your understanding of how far we've traveled. But the journey is complete. The lessons have been learned not just by you tonight, but by generations of healers who built the foundation of safety and knowledge that protects you now. Every mistake we've explored together became a stepping stone toward the modern world that cradles you. I want to thank you for accompanying me on this gentle expedition through history's shadows. Thank you for lending me your attention during these quiet hours, for allowing these stories to unfold in the safe haven of your peaceful evening. It has been an honor to share this time with you. to offer these tales as a bridge between the day's activity and the night's restoration. Now it's time to let go completely. Time to allow your consciousness to drift like a leaf on a calm stream, carried along by currents too gentle to resist. Your breathing will slow, your thoughts will soften at their edges, and sleep will come to you as naturally as darkness follows twilight. Sleep well. Dear friend, rest peacefully in your modern world of safety and understanding. Dream pleasant dreams, if you dream at all, and let the night restore you completely. The stories are finished now. The voices from the past have returned to their eternal silence. All that remains is peace.